Welcome to part 3 of communication in the context of neurodevelopmental diversity. Again, I am Celina Cerf, a former speech language pathologist and currently a neurodevelopmental fellow at Kennedy Krieger. Let's begin. The objective for part 3 is to discuss ways to support play and communication stages. Let's begin with play. And here in this picture, we already see a form of play, which is getting all of our toys together. Here are the beginning of play levels. So at the very beginning, we have indiscriminate actions. All objects are treated alike, so you might see mouthing, throwing, and banging items. It's important, I think, to realize that this is an element of play. This is exploring our environment and engaging with our surroundings. And so often ways to promote engagement with your child is joining in with some of these activities. Then the next level up from this play skill is using single objects for their intended purpose. A lot of times this is for cause and effect, such as rolling a ball, pushing a car, squeezing a stuffed animal, or pushing a button. A lot of children love the cause and effect play stage and might revert to this type of play when they are maybe to even self-soothe or to distract from maybe an overwhelming environment. The next play stage is to separate presented configurations or take apart toys. So this is taking apart puzzle pieces, taking nesting cups apart, probably very familiar with this stage as well. It can be fun to create routines with this stage. So if a child is taking something apart, then you build it back up and then they take it apart. And then before you know it, you've created a back and forth play routine with your child. The next stage is presentation combination. So that's putting together or putting toys together in their original configuration. So then they might start putting those nesting cups together after they see you doing it over and over again. This is a great example of putting several items together, interacting with them to combine them and have that enjoyment. So just as we saw, the next play skill is general combinations. So just using the properties of objects without specificity, but putting them together. So this can be putting blocks in a dump truck, beads in a bowl, toys in a bin, or as we saw, stacking other items. Then the next level is incorporating pretend skills. So pretend self is when you relate objects to yourself with a pretend quality, such as raising an empty cup to your mouth, or an empty spoon to your mouth, or a toy phone to the ear. The next skill is specific combinations. So that's preserving unique characteristics of an object for construction. So stacking blocks, stringing beads, rolling a car down a ramp. Then we get into more pretend play with child as agent. So this is using a toy or a prop to reenact something. So giving the doll a cup to take a drink, or bringing a spoon to the animal's mouth. So the child is doing the action in a pretend play manner for a doll. Single scheme sequence is extending the same familiar action to two or more figures or people. So bringing the spoon to oneself, then to the parent, then to the doll to share in the same sequence. All right. A few more of these play skill levels involve a little bit more pretend play. So this just keeps building on using objects in the place of another object. I won't read through all of these, but this is just to give you an idea of different ways to continue building on pretend play, on routines, on sequences of things to get more and more creative. Next, let's talk about communication stages. It's helpful to recognize what stage of communication your child is currently at to then introduce new skills in an approachable way. The idea of communication stages was introduced by a program called More Than Words. And this was a program that was originally intended for children with autism, but I find that this concept is helpful for all children, no matter their neurodiversity. So we'll talk through own agenda, requester, and early communicator stages. I particularly like how with these stages, we think about engagement, play, and language as a function of communication. So in the own agenda stage, engagement is a little more independent, and children tend to not be interested in others, like to do most things on their own, and they prefer to play alone. So play may not be involving toys, or they may play with toys in unusual ways. With language, protests tend to include crying and screaming, and then children may request by looking at or reaching for items they want, but they have not yet learned functional use of language to request. To build receptive language, an important concept is to create routines. So doing things with your child in the same way so that they can predict what will happen, such as with like a book activity or within different play schemes as well. This will help them follow through when giving them a direction. You can incorporate that behavioral technique we previously discussed in part 2 called the 3-point rule. Showing your child images or objects can also help them understand what you're saying. For example, using books with images can help teach new concepts and specifically pair your words with these images. At this stage, to teach expressive language, the emphasis is on setting up the situation. So this involves creating opportunities for your child to intentionally communicate, as we discussed in part 2. One way to do this is adapting the environment to encourage requesting, such as placing favorite toys or snacks out of reach. And then encouraging them also to point to items while asking for help. When they point, repeat or say that word for the desired object to continue pairing the item with the word while they're engaged. The next communication stage is the requester stage. This is when a child begins to realize that their own actions impact you and they're interacting more with you, albeit that may be briefly. They begin to enjoy person-centered engagement such as tickles and peekaboo. And then for language, maybe they're pulling you or leading you to desired objects. They communicate primarily when wanting or needing something. They understand steps and familiar routines, and sometimes they follow some simple familiar directions. Engagement and play is an important aspect of this stage as well to create person-centered physical games. So this is the back and forth tickle, peekaboo, chasing, jumping, and you can embed turn taking in this way. And this is very much a child-led activity. So imitating what your child's doing with their preferred toy, trying to take turns back and forth with interacting with a preferred toy. And then when you're in that routine and taking turns and have something going, then trying to embed doing something else with the toy to see if they then imitate that new action and scaffold that new play skill. But overall, it's important to follow your child's lead and try not to create too many demands on language because the emphasis is really on engagement and play. For receptive language, we're working on understanding of familiar words and directions. So you're using short phrases with the goal of understanding or comprehending. You can describe or narrate what your child is doing. Also continue to help with following those directions with techniques such as that 3-point rule that we discussed, and introducing different vocabulary, including descriptors, emotions, and even getting into some past tense verbs. Continue building on requesting at this stage. So if you see your child pulling you by the hand towards something, trying to shape that moment into using a point or a gesture for more, for example, or if you're working on a picture exchange communication, showing them the picture that corresponds to the item of interest, or maybe working on a verbal approximation for the item of interest, such as if it's a toy, toy, or a specific word for that toy. Also helps to create opportunities for requests. Here are some examples. We've gone through a couple of these examples, but I think a fun one to visit here is creating surprises in an established routine, such as putting their socks on their hands or putting in the bathtub while it's still empty when they're expecting water. The last stage I'm going to walk through is the early communicator stage. This involves interacting with familiar people, with familiar situations, playing for longer amounts of time, and language is getting more complex with requests and understanding simple familiar sentences and the names of other people. At this stage and beyond, it really comes down to expanding on language. Ways to expand language are consistently modeling communication at and slightly above your child's level. So you can mirror what they say and then add one additional word, not expecting them to say it that time, but maybe they will use it next. They'll use the longer phrase next time because you provided that model in that context. You can also pair gestures with words, such as a wave with hello. You can practice what's this and yes, no questions, practicing making choices. Again, greetings and farewells are a great thing to practice because it's a pretty simple reciprocal interaction with a gesture and a hi or goodbye. And goodbyes tend to be the most motivating for children, so especially at doctor's visits. So great opportunity to practice there. And then also encouraging your child to describe some of their favorite things can be something to continue working on. Here are some concepts of ways to continue building on language. So thinking about the expressive or the output and receptive, or that input and comprehension. And just with receptive language, being able to follow more complex directions with multiple steps, or embedding commands such as before you do this, and then just enriching them with more and more vocabulary with time. And then expressive language, next steps can be considering sequencing events such as telling about your day. This can be scaffolded with support by having a teacher write a few things that your child did at school or who they might have played with, so that when you ask, what did you do today, you can help provide support and help prompt them on answering accurately what they did. And just taking conversational turns, answering some complex questions, expressing feelings. These are just things to work towards when building language. Finally, I wanted to emphasize again that you know your child best. And so you're already providing an enriching environment and meeting them where they're at in so many ways all throughout the day. One additional tool I wanted to mention was a tool called a communication passport. It can be searched online to see many different ways to set these up, but it can be a way to prompt healthcare providers that you encounter, or just anyone else outside of the home environment, to help them understand ways in which your child prefers to communicate, or in general things that they prefer or things that they're adverse to, so that we can help set up more and more positive interactions with unfamiliar communication partners. So thank you so much for joining me for these talks, and I hope this is helpful in providing some techniques and ways to build on communication and